So today I want to talk about rights, um, such as human rights, like the right to health care or right to a job or housing. So in one sense, I do believe in the right to a job, in the sense that I don't think the state should intervene in the employment marketplace, making it impossible for some people to find work. And that happens today, um, or making it more difficult when you have interventions like compulsory licensure for hairdressers, or jobs that there's really no reason to have a license for, right? It makes some sense to have licensing for an airline pilot or a doctor, because if they do a bad job, somebody could die, right? So it makes sense that you have some level of establishing their qualifications, but nobody's going to die if you get a bad haircut. So I think the consumer is certainly informed enough to be able to make that decision. They get a bad haircut, okay, it's not the end of the world. You just don't go back to that guy. There's no real externality, aside from the people who are forced to look at that haircut for the next couple weeks. Um, but I don't believe in the right to health care or housing, because the implicit understanding behind that belief is that somebody, and somebody in this case being the state, has to provide that to the individual. And the problem is that um, is that in order to the state's a zero sum game. Well, really, it's a negative sum game because you have to pay for the bureaucracy. Um, but it's a in order for somebody to be provided with something, then they have to take that from somebody else. Um, so I also don't believe in gay rights or trans rights or women's rights. I believe that we have rights not because we belong to a group, but because we're individuals. So we have individual rights, um, but there's no sort of group rights. And ultimately, so individual rights like the right to free speech, the right to freedom of assembly, the right to freedom of association, ultimately what these rights really are the right to own property, including your body, which is, of course, your most valuable piece of property. Because you have a right to free speech, that doesn't mean you have the right to say whatever you want anywhere you want, right? Like I can't come to your house and lecture you on why you're a bad person because you're a statist. Or I suppose I could, but if you ask me to leave, I'd have to leave, right? Because it's your property. You have a lease. So really, the right to free speech means you have a right to own property, you have a right, to, including your body, and you have a right to use that property, um, to speak out, in your own home, or um, if you're in public, like um, that's sort of a like, as a libertarian, I don't really believe in public spaces, right? I think that everything should be privately owned. So it's really up to the property owner to determine what sort of behavior they want to allow on their property. Um, and likewise, the right to a free press doesn't mean that the New York Times has to give me a column to pontificate my ideas, but rather that I have the right to start my own newspaper. The government can't come in and shut me down. So really, all rights come down to property rights. Um, yeah, and that's all I want to say about that.